Welcome to the Jisc Regional Support Centre, Yorkshire and Humber, Festival of Teaching and Learning 2014. Today we are at the Rose Bowl in Leeds and this is question time. I'd like to introduce our panel for this afternoon. On my far left we have Bill Jones, who's the Director of Student Experience at Sheffield College. Welcome. Teresa Rowland, next to me, is the Development Officer for Hull Adult Community Learning. I have here on my right Jessica Brown, who is a student at North Lindsey College, and finally Rupert Forsyth, founder of Campus Interactive. So please will you all put your hands together to welcome our panel. We've been inundated today with questions on the feedback form, so thank you to everybody who has submitted a question. We have had to pare them down quite a lot. I'm sorry if your question hasn't been picked out, but we will also take some questions from the audience, so if things have occurred to you throughout the day that you haven't written down, hopefully we'll get a chance to address those questions for you. But we do only have about half an hour, so I want to press on. With our first question, which is from Richard Nelson from Bradford College, which, if you're all right, Richard, I'll read out, or would you like to? Okay, so very simply, Richard says, how can we reward informal learning? So perhaps, Teresa, I'll come to you first for that one. Give you all some thinking time.
We tend to use the Star Awards and things like that, and if we're working with parents, that we'll give them free books that they couldn't usually afford, things like that. So it depends who we're working with. If it's the young children and the apprentices, we used to have like passes for the gyms, so they could go to the gym or go for a swim, things like that, and it was all for free.
Yeah, at the risk of giving a politician's answer, I think it's very important to recognise informal learning. And the way we do that would be to recognise formative assessments, to prioritise that through the teaching, learning and assessment strategy, that high quality feedback, developmental feedback is an essential part of the learning process, and to really enforce that, check it through observation, through audit, that sort of thing. And you can also encourage it and recognise it and celebrate it through things like award ceremonies and that type of thing.
Thank you.
I also think that, as well as having the formal recognition, which is fantastic, having sort of an informal recognition process can also, alongside that, probably be a benefit as well. Simply by engaging when we do work as students, I can tell you from my perspective that we like to talk to each other about it, we like to talk to our tutors, so simply just bringing it out and having a discussion about it can then recognise that just on a simplistic level, to think, yeah, I've said this, I've discussed this, someone's given me a further idea and I can build on this, and it encourages us to think, oh, actually I'm going to go read up on about that, or I'm going to follow that one on myself. So informal, you could go with an informal recognition system as well, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I also think perhaps even peer-to-peer learning as well, peer groups teaching their peers and learning with their peers. I think that's quite an important thing in informal learning. So it's kind of echoing, I guess, a little bit what you're saying. Yeah.
Thank you. Richard, perhaps would you like to maybe add something, with it being your question, about perhaps your thought process around the question?
I'm just conscious that there's a lot of learning going on, not just within the classroom, but in lots of other schools and lots of other scenarios, and how we can recognise that in a way that employers could see it, or how we can see it as colleges or universities. The other side of it, as soon as we do start recognising that, then becomes part of the formal learning process and loses its value. So it's just toying with that idea and thinking about that. It's interesting, we get a sort of corporate view from one side of the table, and then when the student view and a different sort of perspective on it from the other side of the table. It's quite interesting.
I think that's the interesting thing, is how does an employer know whether the informal learning has been good informal learning or bad informal learning, or what the scale even is? And I guess that's why they have accreditation systems, because they can say, well, at least they've learned to that point. But it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? How do you say that the informal learning has value on top of the accredited learning? Yeah.
In Sheffield, we've developed a skills passport with employers called Made in Sheffield, and it first of all asked the employers what skills they wanted us to develop and wanted us to recognise, developed a framework for how you would recognise, assess, bring them on, develop those skills, and then capture it in a passport that they could take with them to various employers that were part of the scheme. And the universities and the college is part of the scheme as well. I know that answer's probably a bit corporate, but it's quite effective.
Is there anybody in the audience that is rewarding informal learning in different ways than have already been discussed? Or got any ideas of how they'd like to? Perhaps then we'll move on to the next question, which is an anonymous question, but does follow on around this the thoughts around informal learning. And it says that the presentations that have been heard today, so obviously in this conference, have been very engaging, but it's something that experts and practitioners have been saying for years, that learning needs to be bespoke and that measurements aren't just qualification outcomes. When will funders and inspection agencies get on board with that? Now, I appreciate that none of you are funders or education agencies, but perhaps your thoughts on how this can be sold to funders or agencies.
I think my answer to that would be careful what you ask for, because the funding agencies, as far as I'm aware, are reviewing very seriously technology-enhanced learning and how that can be recognised in the funding mechanisms, and the pretense that that's about raising quality and delivering things better is actually far from the truth. I think it's mostly about reducing guided learning hours and giving less money per student, less money per individual, and that's what we're going to have to manage through that. So.
I do think this has been led, by practitioners, teachers and students yourself. Of all of us, we are essentially the driving force of this, because you're choosing to incorporate it, we're choosing to learn, and to sort of come and use this as well. And I think we are forcing the change in these people, and perhaps they will eventually, I'm not sure, when they will pick this up and perhaps fund it or accredit it, but it's powered by the people. I assume really with that is we are forcing the change, even if it is bit by bit. I think it will sort of come to a head where they realise that even if it is just through making money of it, that this will be a good practice to take up.
Yeah, I'd need to hear the question again.
It was very long-winded. Can we make learning bespoke and not have the measurements of just qualifications? How can we persuade funders and agencies that this is the way to go with education?
Yeah, I mean, I personally come from the point of view that I think technology can do an awful lot to help in that area, and the kind of things like depth of engagement and things like that are quite hard to qualify, and so I don't know how, but I mean it's almost like a little bit of park a pot of cash that says, and use it that way and see what the outcomes are, because it's such a hard thing to define, isn't it?
I think for us the biggies this year, like Bill was saying, it's that we've got to put 10% of it has got to be through the actual IT, and we've got a lot of people who don't want to do that, and it's how do we actually manage that and get the students involved on it when we're quite happy to do that and we see it as an add-on, but some of the students say, well, I don't want that, I like the classroom based and I don't want to be going on a VLE, I don't know how to use it, so we're going to have to put everything in place so they know how to use it, as well as actually do the 10% of our guided learning hours.
I can't pick on anybody from the audience because I don't know whose question it was, but thoughts from the audience about this. Have you had battles with your funding agencies, your external assessors, examiners, about changing your practices, and how's that been?
Maybe there isn't a problem.
There isn't a problem.
Well, the way I see it is we make the change happen and tell the authorities that this is how it's going to be. Because you've got to remember that some of these are actually service, they're supposed to be paying for their service. And you say, well, I'm presenting my material to you in this way, the quality's there, are you happy with it? If you're happy with it, go. If you're not happy, let's have a discussion. But not just go, oh, well, they want it this way because that's where the funding comes from, because that's what we've been told. No, our learners and us, and we as an organisation believe this, so we're going this way, so come with us, or shift the exam board, or something like that. Be more proactive about it instead of sitting back and waiting.
So finding somebody who's happy to have it how you want to present it.
I
don't know
agree
across
with that.
many external examinations or that won't have that dialogue at least with the ones I've come across. I'm sure there are. I mean, there's a couple of early years exam boards that are a bit sort of back in 19th century.
Yeah, we've
But,
just changed.
Other than that, the majority are willing to. They want the answers from us, really. I think as providers.
Yeah. The conservatism comes from the staff. You know, I don't want to disparage my own college's staff, but certainly not all of them, but a small minority of staff at the Sheffield College. The awarding bodies, Ofsted, are crying out for them to use IT more, to embed it more, to use technology-enhanced learning, to devise assessments and methods that students can be assessed that are more imaginative, because it's just so easy to fall back in that traditional, oh, let's set them an assignment and, you know, just hand it in 3 weeks later and mark it. That's lazy. It's easy. And we need to encourage our staff to be more creative and imaginative, and it's certainly not the awarding bodies or Ofsted that are preventing that.
Well, just to give an example of what I think you were talking about, we've developed in the online college a functional English level 1, level 2 course, which is fully online. And we did it with one qualification body. I don't know if I have to be anonymous here. We did it with one qualification body. We did it with one qualification body, but the window of opportunity for students to take the exam, and we were particularly wanting to use it with apprentices in London and various places in the country, with one qualification body was 12 hours. And we tried to negotiate a longer window because it was actually really, really difficult to set up an online test within that time with students dispersed all over the country. So we were forced to go with another qualification body that gave a bigger window of time. I don't know whether it was 20 days or something like that. But all our materials had been written around one qualification body, and you'd think that we would have been in a very strong position that we wanted to carry on with this body. And we'd designed a whole course around it, but there was such inflexibility, to do that. So I don't know whose question it was, but I think that sometimes qualification bodies and assessment procedures actually do really, really act as a barrier for people developing courses, and so I think it is a real issue. Yeah.
Okay, well maybe we'll just take a quick break from my questions from the cards and see if anybody in the audience has a question that they'd like to ask the panel.
Maybe I'm playing a little bit of a devil's advocate in here, since I feel like there's maybe a little bit of assessment bashing going on in here, and having a bit of teacher bashing going on. I like to defend people that are being bashed. So my question is, does anybody feel like assessment that they are doing, a qualification that they're doing, is fit for purpose and is providing, instead of having barriers, is lifting barriers to allow students to succeed and progress in the ways that we want our students to succeed and progress? What's an assessment look like that does
So
that?
what are the good assessments that are being used? Maybe just for you
I
to start.
can't tell you specifically what assessment board. I'm sure you could speak to the lecturers at the college afterwards who'd probably tell you, but there is such a range that you can do, each of what you've probably all suggested, including written essays, creating e-books, coming up with presentations. We've made seminars, we've designed sort of bits and bobs to share using that, and that's been around predominantly because we've been using the mobile technology, so that's sort of allowed a different way of assessing and actually feedback as well. And we've had that in different video formats and bits and bobs as well. So I can't tell you which one, sorry. Or just put them in and ignore them, quite usually, honestly. But there are those out there, obviously, because there is a way of doing it, that you can adapt it to what you're doing. Now, I imagine for yourselves it will be give and take in each situation, like yourself, finding one that will suit you, but it is out there to be able to adapt it to your needs and to making a different assessment, which has been beneficial actually to us as students, to be able to do it in a different way and to think of this in different ways, and hopefully that will be more specific across a range of industries. So it is out there somewhere.
So there's definitely some good
It is
assessment
out
going
there.
on at Midlands.
I think for me, it's as a parenting practitioner, the last thing the parents who I work with want is to be doing an exam or anything else. We tend to use a life and living one, so it's things like taking part in a conversation, being routines, being able to get there on time, being able to get the children to school on time. And there's nothing extra for those parents to do. It's all embedded within the course. And then they think it's amazing because at the end of it, it's probably the first certificate they've got. And all they've done is joined in, it's helped the families and everything. And for me, the life and living are a fantastic way of assessing, because it's just by talking to people, looking at filling in forms, all that sort of thing. So it's a lot more informal, but it is actually accredited as well.
So it's assessment that's relevant
To what they're doing. And there's a purpose behind it as well.
Bill?
Sadly, too far removed from teaching. I'm doing a little bit of teaching, did a little bit of teaching this year, but I was fortunate enough to be able to witness some presentations from our HNC civil engineering students who were being assessed, and it was a wonderful exercise that they were presenting, that they'd had to design, as you'd expect from civil engineering students, but they'd had to design a building on a real area near the college, but had actually had to go through the proper process of the planning permission, investigating the gas, the water, and etc. And it was very impressive. It's exactly what they would be doing once they were qualified a few months later.
Okay, thank you. Rupert, anything?
I think it's really interesting to hear some of the things that you just talked about there, because what you're saying is actually the assessment for those particular things works. And so can other courses and other structures learn from the ones that we think are good and adapt and develop to be able to accommodate, whatever it is that is being taught. So I think that was a really good question to give the other side of the coin. So it's a mixed bag out there. How do we get it more that way than that way?
Okay. We've got 5 minutes. I think we'll just try and squeeze in one more question, and now it's which one to pick out of my long list. So as I apologise for not picking them all out, I'm going to go with this one that says, learning is relying more and more on the internet and technology, but how do we reach students who don't have or can't afford smartphones or iPads? And this is an amalgamation of 2 questions, one from Sandy Dreyer from Hull College and one from Francis Vervis. So, who would like to kick off?
Well, digital inclusion, I think it's known as, is very important, and I think we try to do our best at the Sheffield College. We could probably do more, but we can loan students that don't have access to. I've got the question right, haven't I?
Yes.
Yeah. Don't have access to mobile devices or whatever. We can loan them for the period of the course. Increasingly, for courses where there are fees, we're asking students to buy the device of choice for that course as part of the course fees, and that's going to be encouraged with grants, loans, bursaries for those students that can't afford them.
I think that's really interesting because, again, I'm involved in that sort of area. And one of the things that I was at a college on Monday, and they started off a few years ago lending out devices to their students. And each year they were surveying the students as they came in to find out who had smart devices and on what platforms they were operating on and so on. And this year when they came in, there was only one student who didn't have a smart device. And so in that instance, they were able to help that particular student. So actually, as the more it does become the norm, then perhaps the easier it is to help those who aren't up to speed or whatever it is with the technology. And And the other really interesting thing was that for this particular group of students, between the ages of 16 and 18, when we looked at the Google Analytics of what they were looking at, 80% of those students were opening things on an Apple device, and they tend to be the most expensive. So that's a kind of a really, interesting thing. And now they're developing their digital stuff for when those guys arrive, more around the Apple iOS platform.
Yeah, we have in our course done it exactly as you've said, by using the inclusion of the fees, which we all actually agreed to sign up to as a group. We had the discussion about it, and obviously it would go on our fees, and do we consider it? And it is a small group, it's only 16 of us, but after the discussion we did all choose to sign up to it that way, so that was a really popular way of doing it, obviously, between us all. Some of us already had the smart devices, and some people did not, and didn't want too sure about using them, and never mind buying them. But I think with all technology, you've probably all had this problem before when it came to how do we buy a computer that everybody can use. And then suddenly we've got a rooms full of computer rooms, and then we've got computers in every room, every station. So I do think it is a problem that can be possibly solved by using grants, by using put it on the student loans, by perhaps, and the most important thing as a student to think about is on the personal level, is be able to talk about this, have it as a really open discussion, so that people can access this, people can ask the question, and it can be answered, because as long as you can ask that question, it can be answered. Obviously discussions can be had and ways can be found, certainly.
I think the other thing that's interesting about the technology side of things as well is, like, an iPad's expensive, 500 quid, no doubt about it. But if you've got that for 3 or 4 years for a course, that might be then 100, 120 quid a year or whatever. How does that compare to perhaps 20, 30 years ago in traditional learning, when you were going out and buying books? Would you be spending a similar proportion of your money on those sorts of things? And are we getting perhaps a bit too worried about the fact that people have to pay for their tools of their education?
For us, it's a lot of our work, what we do is actually out in the community, and we don't have the facilities for actually using iPads, things like that. A lot of the courses are free, so we don't have the money to buy them. We tend to work more in partnership with other organisations like the libraries, the BBC Open Centre, where I'm based. We've got 16 computers there that people can come in and use for free. We put drop-in sessions in our centres where we've got a tutor there to help them out. We work with the job centre, things like that. We've actually, at long last, got some tablets at one of our new centres, but that's more for the apprenticeships. But for us, it's having the money to actually buy those, because a lot of our courses we run in the community are free, and we don't have that option.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just one other thing just on that. I think the real shame is the absence of the National Scholarship Programme as well. The fact that that's moving from obviously undergraduate to postgraduate, and that's a real shame, because there was a real opportunity to include that as our institutional services as part of the allocation, and it's just a real shame. And certainly as members of the AOC and what have you, we should be continuing to have those discussions to actually say, well, really, there was a real, albeit quite a short time that it was in existence, there was a real benefit to that, to the wider population. And I think we should really not just accept that the money's going to go to postgraduate studies, but actually that it should be continued in undergraduate.
Okay, thank you. 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Free speech, 10 seconds.
To support what Rupert was saying, please check the Office of National Statistics on household device usage. It tells you that over 90% of learners have access to a device which they can use for learning. The second thing is, it's up to the teaching staff to look at ways of opening up their resources so people can access it on any device, not just one of them, what do you call iPad-y things. Just having this as access whatever device they've got. And that was a fantastic suggestion you were saying about there is opportunities to access technology somewhere. And it's about giving the people, the students, the whoever, the opportunities to have a chance to play and find out where they can do it without worrying about it and worrying about cost.
Thank you.
20
Okay,
seconds.
thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the panel for your contributions, and I know we have run massively over time, sorry.
Right, it's time to close.